Good evening. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, answering your questions tonight. Journalist and author David Marr, award-winning stage and film actress Jacki Weaver, celebrated Australian writer, satirist and actor Barry Humphries, English actress and champion of Dickens women Miriam Margolyes, and former leader of the Liberal Party, John Hewson. Please welcome our panel. Right, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Standard Time and simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. Go to our website to send a question or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Our first question comes from Herb Ladley.
I'm a foreign worker living in this country on a temporary resident visa. Australia seems to welcome people like me and even European backpackers who do unskilled work. Yet there's now an outcry about Asian workers coming to fill a critical labor shortage. Is this an economic issue or a race issue? And has this country really gotten beyond the white Australia policy?
David Marr, let's start with you.
We have a long lingering inheritance of the white Australia policy. And it most clearly shows itself in the wish that we have a peculiarly controlled notion of who can come in and out of this country. Border control, border protection, all of that stuff is an expression in this day and age of an old race fear. And the notion is that Australians will very, very carefully select who comes into this country. So they might not be quite white, but at least they'll be kind of one of us. Now, I'm burlesquing it, of course, as I say that, but that's roughly where we are.
So that's David, why both people... Are you suggesting that the union leaders who are against these workers are sort of coming up with a new thought, will decide which workers come into this country and the manner in which they come?
There's always been a fear of cheap coloured labour coming into this country. It goes back to the 1820s, and it's still around. And of course it's not vicious in the way it once was, but there are still signs of it there. I think, in fact, the workers who are going to be flooding into this country over the next few years are going to come from Greece, Ireland, Portugal and Spain. And we will welcome them with open arms. But the fear and how people are actually greeted once they come here are two different things. We're a contradictory country.
Jacki Weaver.
It didn't occur to me that they were going to be Asians. I thought the problem was that they thought it was putting Australians out of work. But the fact of the matter is a lot of the Eastern Australians who are out of work don't want to go all the way to Western Australia, do they?
It's a long way.
I can't bear to think that it's a racist thing. Surely not after all this time.
Barry Humphries, do you have any thoughts on this?
Very few, I must say. But... you know, I wouldn't want to be in those mines. Are they open-cut mines, or do you go...
Many of them are these days, yes. Most of them are.
It is a long way away. But,
I can see you in one of those trucks, though.
Yeah. Is this something to do with Gina Rinehart, I wonder? I mean... she's involved, isn't she?
Yes, she's built a very big mine, or is building a very, very big mine, the biggest iron ore mine in the world in history.
Well, I hope she can, after all that's over, she can afford a hairdresser. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
We have to be very careful about going down that path on this programme.
Oh, do you? I'm sorry.
Germaine Greer had a bit of a moment. Miriam Margolyes.
Margolyes, please.
Margolyes, I beg your pardon.
I want to be an Australian, and I can quite understand why everybody else does too. I know you've got to be a bit picky. I hope you'll let this old Jewish lesbian in.
As long as you don't take any work from manufacturing workers.
I don't think I'm much good in overalls, actually, but I think it's a perfectly serious question, and I think there is a racist streak in some Australians and a very generous streak in others, and I hope the generous streak overcomes the other one. These are tough times, and it's natural for people to be frightened that they're losing their jobs. Stop being frightened, let people into work. It'll be a better country for it.
John Hewson.
I've got nothing to add to that answer. It's excellent.
So let me ask you this then. What did you make of Paul Howes, the union leader, his rhetorical statement that aren't we meant to be fighting Gina Rinehart?
Well, I think there's a political argument there, obviously. I mean, the government spent months attacking the opposition for being too close to those powerful individuals in Australia. But I think he was more trying to strike a chord with the union membership on the East Coast, many of which have lost their jobs, and is just, I think, seeking support. But realistically, as Barry said, very few of them are going to want to move from the East Coast to the West Coast, even with very attractive salaries.
Let's go back to the thrust of the question that was asked earlier on this issue. Is it just about economics, or is it racially charged?
Well, I think it is essentially about economics, but there's always an element in Australia, as I think David said, you don't have to scratch too hard, and you do raise a racist sentiment at times.
Yeah, we mentioned Gina Rinehart before. There's a Facebook question. While Barry's just going to deal with his phone, that's probably your agent just wondering if that was a very good joke.
Hello. I'll ring back soon.
OK, now that was clearly...
I don't know how to switch these things off.
We'll leave that with Jacki. I'm sure people have managed it.
You know that Berlusconi took a call on his mobile phone when he was having an audience with the Pope? Just beats that.
OK, I suspect that was
So sorry.
No, I'm sure it was someone just ringing up with a question. In fact, we've got a Facebook question. It's from Amelia Starbright. Why is Gina Rinehart so greedy? Let's throw that to David Marr.
Well, I think it's a personal question, isn't it, really? Yes, she's the richest woman in the world, and she's humiliating herself and her family in the courts in order not to have to pay her children the money that is pouring into the estate so that she can control it and dole it out exactly as she wants. This is amazingly perverse behaviour. But as I understand it, behind it all lies this towering ambition to fund in her own right to get up this immense iron ore mine. And for that, she seems to be willing to appear as greedy as all get out. She's willing to appear brutally cruel to her own family, and so she goes. There is a funny way in which huge amounts of money in some people don't actually sate the appetite, but make them crave more. It's something about us human beings.
I'm just contemplating the fact that we managed to get through the global financial crisis because people like Gina Rinehart took risks and built mines, and those mines have kept our economy afloat. Do you still consider that building that mine to be greedy or evidence of greed?
Our economy was not kept afloat by mining after the GFC. Our economy was kept afloat because of the cash injections that were thrown into it by the government and by Treasury. Mining actually employs a remarkably few number of people in Australia.
But it injects a massive amount of capital and wages and resources into the country.
Tony, I'm not saying that it's not inconsiderable, but there are ways of behaving when you are one of the richest people in the world with a little more grace than she behaves, particularly vis-a-vis her own family. And she appears to display a quite remarkable wish to control every cent that goes through her hands.
Barry Humphries, looking at these mining billionaires who have taken such a huge space on the Australian stage, if you can put it that way, what are your thoughts?
I'm unspoilt by wealth, and it doesn't necessarily distort the character. Greed, to me, is one of the least of the vices. And I'm not drawn to Gina. I mean, if I woke up in a motel with her on the next pillow, I would...
You'd be very surprised.
Very surprised. But then I don't like her family very much either. I mean, they all deserve each other, in my view. And what she does with her money is really her own affair. She's putting it back in some way, or digging it up, or whatever she's doing. Again, it's a very long way away, isn't it?
Barry, this show goes live to Western Australia.
Oh, Western Australia.
Where you've often performed quite successfully.
Is that Perth as well?
To date. Yes.
Well, in that case...
Well, I know that you are about to go on the road again, and so I was actually wondering if characters like Gina, Rinehart, Clive Palmer, who's, of course, another billionaire who's building a replica of the Titanic at the moment, if these people might, in fact, figure in some way.
These people in Perth are wonderful. There's a mine of people bigger than the one that Gina is digging. The characters in Perth are unbelievable. A replica of the Titanic.
Well, actually, that particular builder is from Queensland rather than Perth, but not to...
Queensland is really the West Australia of the North.
Can I bring in Jacki Weaver, who probably does know who we're talking about?
I think we were getting a bit unkind about Mrs. Rinehart. I think I'd like to take another tack, and it's so unimaginable, $29 billion. When I was little, do you remember $1 billion was a million, but now it's 1,000 million? Now
everything's getting smaller.
Yeah. But that's like winning $29 million in Powerball 1,000 times. It's unimaginable, isn't it? And if you had that much money, you'd get such pleasure giving it away, wouldn't you?
Oh, I don't think so. I measure money in jokes, you know.
Yeah.
If I buy something for my children, I tell them, you know, well, that was 1,000 jokes. So that's the number of jokes I had to tell to get that money.
That's a fascinating...
Pay the tax on it.
That's quite a fascinating insight, because Picasso used to draw pictures to pay at restaurants. Do you do the same sort of thing?
I don't... Well, not in restaurants, no. But it's a good
tell jokes
idea.
to the waiter and hope they'll forgive you the bill?
Never happened.
Miriam, I think we were talking about Gina Rinehart.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because poor woman, she is not a beauty. And I am not a beauty either, so I know what it's like to be fat and ugly.
Come on.
And having money makes it easier, I imagine. What troubles me about her is that she is not generous. I think it's fine to be as rich as you possibly can be, but you've got to be generous. You've got to be aware of people who are less fortunate and give a lot of it away. I do. I'm absolutely wonderful like that. But she isn't, and I think
I'd have to say, as an artist, you might appreciate this. She did actually give the gift of a poem on a giant piece of iron ore.
Well, that's remarkable, isn't it? No, I don't really know very much about Gina Rinehart, but what I know, I don't care for.
John Hewson, someone better stick up.
Follow all that?
Well, I think perhaps you should anchor this discussion in some way.
Look, I find it very difficult to judge people like Gina Rinehart. Indeed, I find it very difficult to understand people like Gina Rinehart, but I can see what she's trying to do in terms of building this mine. I don't excuse the way she's doing it. I just don't understand it.
You don't understand doing it in the way that
well,
she's
just,
doing?
you know, the greed you're drawing attention to in relation to her children, in relation to giving to charity or whatever. I mean, it's a choice she's made, but I don't personally understand it. I think you have a responsibility in this country to put a bit back beyond what you've taken out.
OK, we're going to move on. You're watching Q&A Live, unpredictable and rather wonderful tonight. The next question comes from Alison Roberts-Brown.
I've been away from Australia for about 23 years, and that's just long enough to completely disconnect from Australian politics. But coming back, I've found the politicians tend to be really robotic, and they're speaking from a script. And as Barry Humphries, to quote you, nothing is called what it is anymore. I've watched TV a number of times, political addresses, and actually thought I was watching a spoof or a send-up. And just wanted to address the question to Barry Humphries. When you come back to Australia, what are the marked differences that you see in how our politics is being played out?
I think the wonderful thing about Australia is that it never changes at all. I've been called an expatriate, which is really quite insulting, because what it means is traitor. That's what it means. And even people who should know better have accused me in the press and on television living abroad and then coming back and saying rude things about Australia. It's tiresome, but it still goes on. But I come back and it's really like a kind of show, a comedy show. Our politics is wonderfully entertaining if it wasn't sad at the same time. And I remember very well, because I'm old enough to remember, that the worst thing that ever happened in this country was the broadcasting of Parliament. People were horrified for the first time to hear the voices of our politicians. And people say, oh, but they're so common. Of course, that's the good thing about Australia, that it is common. There was an old joke in Punch, the humorous periodical, where two men meet on a street corner, and one says, I say, old boy, are you an Australian? And the other says, no, just common. But I can't say much more, except...
That's almost enough for an Australian editorial on its, just on its own.
It is.
Yes, I think so. What is it you find sad when you watch Australian politics? Because that seemed to be the overwhelming...
We're in the hands of these people. They're sort of running our lives. And they're so uninteresting. That's the worst thing about them.
They're not all bad.
No, the ones who win are not very nice, are they? There are some good ones on the back benches, I suppose. Or who've retired from politics, like John.
I love Tanya Plibersek and Penny Wong.
Oh, do you?
I think they're gorgeous. But you're right, a lot of them do talk in that robotic spin. Occasionally there's someone dreadful who doesn't talk in the spin but says the most appalling things, like, what's that, Senator Bill Homophobe.
But you see, so few of them have had jobs. They haven't worked at anything, have they?
That's not strictly true. There's a lot of lawyers.
Oh, yes, I know what kind of work they do. Matrimonial lawyers, at any rate. But
have you been watching Question Time to gather material for the new show? Just out of interest?
I have sometimes, but I mean, I couldn't rival Question Time.
Yes.
I should get...
As a piece of satire, you mean?
As a piece of satire, it is unique and totally satisfying and very, very funny. But as I say, there's a rather tragic dimension to this. These people are... It's power they're interested in, isn't it? It's power. And I don't like people who are interested in power.
Miriam, well, actually, let's go to someone who was interested in power that just sort of eluded your grasp, I must say. John Hewson, your thoughts about current politics? I mean, listening to this, I mean, it's reflected, obviously, on this panel, but on many other panels that we've had and in the audience among questioners. Has something become degraded about what's going on in politics? And if so, how's that happened?
Well, essentially, they're trying to win the 24-hour media cycle. And so everyone is repeating the same sort of messages from each side because, as I say, they're staying on message. They're keeping their message focused and saying very little and certainly not governing the country.
Miriam, do you have any thoughts? I mean, you want to become an Australian, you're watching what's going on here.
I do watch what's going on, and I do think that there's a certain puniness about all politicians around the world, actually. I'm looking at my own country, England, which is, you know, bereft of intelligence at the top. I like Julia Gillard. I think she's fascinating, and because I'm on the left, I would support her anyway. I can't bear the other little fellow. I have the pleasure of knowing Bob Hawke. I know he wasn't your favourite chap, but I thought he was just ravishing. And there's nobody quite like him now, and I think I would have loved somebody like that in Parliament.
But you are a lesbian, you know.
Well, it's not a final.
You haven't been forced to write that on your citizenship papers, have you?
No. I hope I won't have to.
David, can you just reflect on this slightly mad conversation.
Well, it's a lot more entertaining than Question Time, I reckon. Yes, everybody is robotic. The messages are written before dawn. They're handed out on little slips of paper. Everybody has to repeat them all day. The other day, the message was, how can the Prime Minister be trusted in anything when she... Then just sort of, add. The battering rams of the opposition keep going, and the Labor parties, along the battlements, pouring excrement and hot pitch down on the invading troops. And every single day, it is the same. It is the same. And the Australian people do not like it. They do not like it. They are sick of it. But the politicians who we have put there do not seem to be able to rise above it. And I think it is going to grind its way on until the elections at the end of next year. And yet, oddly enough, at the same time, the business of government goes on in this country. Laws are being passed, the government is governing, and yet every day or every sitting day, all of these players come together once again to, what is it? It's kind of like mud wrestling with public consequences or something.
And your economy is robust.
We're booming. And yet we're in this...
You could argue, thanks to people like Gina, Rinehart,
Thanks to Gina.
Clive Palmer and others.
I don't think it's because of those two people. No, I
not
think
solely, that's clearly
there
the
are
case.
other reasons for it. And I think it's something that Australians should be very proud of.
But they're not. And that's a very, very successful political outcome that has been worked by the opposition. Australians have been led to believe that they are on the lip of the cliff and that things in this country are appalling. And we have, by the standards of the world, a miracle economy. And yet, in Australia, the response to it is one of gloom and uncertainty. It's a political achievement of the first water. It is extraordinary.
Let me just ask Barry this. When you come here, does it seem like you're living in a miracle economy?
Well, you say when I come here as though I just suddenly descend in a balloon. I'm here every year of my life, for months at a time, but not always publicly, I'm disguised as other people and I'm pushing little trolleys in Woolworths, doing ordinary things. Well, not so ordinary, but prosaic things. And does it seem... What?
Does it seem, when you're pushing that shopping trolley in disguise, does it actually seem like you're in a miracle economy?
I feel as though I am in a miracle economy. This place is extraordinarily wonderful, I think. And prosperous, and I don't think a lot of people in Australia realise what a paradise it is. I don't know who's the architect of this. It's probably not Gina Rinehart, but it's us. We've made this a tremendous country, and if Miriam Margolyes wants to be one of us, that's a pretty big compliment, I think.
OK, you're watching Q&A. Remember, you can send your questions by video to our website. The address is on the screen to find out how to do that. Our next question is a video. It comes from James Match in Dulwich Hill, New South Wales.
Dr. Hewson, you've been opposition leader. You know about the pressures of having to call the government to account. What do you think of Tony Abbott's relentless pursuit of Craig Thomson and his claim that he should resign his seat and that he's not entitled to the presumption of innocence because he's guilty? Is it justice he seeks, or is it power? Is it time to lay off and leave it to the courts?
John Hewson.
Look, I think he's taking the obvious political opportunity that's been there to score points on the government, and Craig Thomson is the mechanism today by which he's doing that. I mean, if I look at what Craig Thomson's done, I think Craig Thomson only has Craig Thomson to blame. He, one way or other, it's alleged, has mishandled about half a million dollars worth of other people's money.
And several women.
And well, perhaps, yes. I'm not sure mishandled, but anyway.
That's true.
And I do think that there is a presumption of innocence, but the electorate has made up its mind.
Yes, I don't think, despite what the question is, I don't think Tony Abbott has actually said he does not have...
I was going to say he hasn't said most of what was attributed to him there, but the fact is I think the electorate has made up its mind, and Craig is living with the consequences of the circumstances that he created, and he keeps feeding it. He keeps appearing, making speeches and giving press interviews, and you know, I think the opposition's done what you'd expect opposition to do in those circumstances.
Jacki Weaver, can I just get you to reflect on the Craig Thompson affair?
Whatever he's done or whatever he's supposed to have done, I feel sorry for him. Every time you see that anguished face, he looks like a very desperate person, and I just hope he doesn't top himself. I think, you know, no matter what happens to you, nothing's worth doing that. And he does look so full of anguish. I think we should also remember that while it's really wrong to purloin other people's money, it's perfectly legitimate to pay a sex worker for services rendered. And I think that
Channel 9 certainly intends to do that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. For a television program to bribe a prostitute to breach the client confidentiality, I think is unconscionable.
David, just leave 60,000 on the bedside table.
What concerns me is what proof she will bring to the interview. Is there a mole? Is there some distinguishing mark that only she and he know about? It does disturb me. How will we know about the bona fides of this woman? It is a remarkable life that she's leading. It appears that she got several $100s for the act, and she's going to get about 1,000 times that amount for talking about it, which I think once again proves that talking is a very virtuous and useful thing in life. But, you know, I'm not sure that we need her. I'm not sure that we need her. I mean, I don't want to be, you know, go endlessly through the details of this, but the Fairfax newspapers published the credit card slips, and it was a union credit card that purchased sex. And his signature is on the front, and his license number is on the back, and the phone records prove that it was his phone that rang to make the bookings. Now, I don't myself think, and he has no explanation for any of this, I don't really think we need the testimony of the tart to tell us what happened that night. But that would appear to be what is now going to happen. And I can't help feeling that Thompson has brought this on his own head as well.
Barry Humphries.
Thompson is a liar and a ratbag. No question of that. And I deplore, and it's moving on to rather another theme, a famous television network like Nine and their actions in paying a prostitute amount of money like that to sort of sing like a canary. In the same way as another television program, well-known television magazine program, doorstopped my friend Clive James.
Oh, yes.
Quite recently.
It was outrageous.
And produced some floozy and humiliated him in the street. And they flew this woman across the world for this deplorable, disgraceful piece of television. Something serious is happening, and there is a thing called the Press Council, which seems absolutely impotent. I mean, all they did was tut-tut over that. And meanwhile, we have to put up with this fellow, Craig Thompson, who admittedly looks devastated, so he should, I think.
He's not devastated enough to confess he did it.
Let's, can I go to interrupt, because we've got a video question on the same subject. It's from Jack James Baxter in Wollongong, New South Wales.
My question is to Barry Humphries. Mr. Humphries, due to the retirement of Sir Les Patterson, the Australian political landscape will miss the scandalous behaviours of the most popular senior Labor statesman. Do you think Craig Thompson could be the new Les Patterson of Australian politics?
Well, we'd have to go. We'll have to find out what the girl has to say about him. But I don't think he's got the build. Do you really?
No, he hasn't, no.
I've only seen him from the waist up, but I mean, look, he's not amusing enough. That's the trouble with him. He's not only a liar, but he's a bore. And we're all meant to feel sorry for him. But thank you for that question, because Les Patterson is really a very nice person and a dedicated politician. He's now, anyway, retired from politics and has become a celebrity chef. If you come along to my already sold-out farewell show, you'll see him in action.
Just going back to one of the earlier questions, the kind of politicians upon which he was based, they don't seem to exist anymore.
That's what they say. You haven't been to Queensland lately, have you? They exist, of course they do. What about that fellow Palmer? Is his name Palmer?
Clive Palmer, yes.
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 Clive
You're right.
Palmer is the reincarnation of Les Patterson.
He's got the build for it.
He's the one who's building the Titanic, incidentally.
Yes, I'm not surprised. No, happily, that sort of politician will always exist in Australia.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the material is never ending, is what
It's
you're saying.
never ending. It's just like the hole. Gina's hole.
I'm sorry, it is... It really is time to move along. You're watching Q&A. The next question comes from Stephen Walker. Where's Stephen?
Miriam, your fearlessness in speaking your mind is truly admirable. Has there ever been a time when it's got you into serious trouble and you wish that you had kept quiet instead?
I don't think it's ever got me, and thank you for the kind remark. Some people say I should just shut up. I think it does cause difficulties when I speak about Israel, because I'm Jewish and I'm very critical of Israel, and that does get me into trouble. I'm going to London soon when I finish here at the Opera House, and I'm doing my show in North London, which is a Jewish area, and they're not going to enjoy it because of what I say. But I have to tell the truth, don't I? I think you have to say what you think, and be truthful. So.
Jacki Weaver, let me bring you in here. Is there anything that that you've regretted saying when speaking out?
Well, a long time ago I did some ads for a political party, and the backlash, the hate mail was not only surprising, it was vicious and really distressing. And it made me resolve way back then to shut my trap and not to talk about politics ever again. But I will tell you that the best haters are the worst spellers, and with no grasp of grammar.
I don't know if it's apocryphal, but is it true that you said you'd never vote for John Howard because you couldn't ever vote for someone who looked like Louis the Fly?
On reflection, I think that was very unkind.
OK. On a far more serious note, though, I mean, Kate Blanchett came across this phenomenon when she did those climate change ads. So I'm just wondering whether actresses speaking out about politics, whether your experience is actually has a broader context.
Well, you know, we're citizens too, and some of us... Look at Miriam, she's very politically aware. Why can't we say... I mean, these people are free to air their views. Why can't we? It's pretty basic, isn't it? I thought that the opprobrium that was heaped on Kate was so unfair when it was all good stuff she was talking about.
David Marr?
I think
I'm sure you probably have never considered getting in trouble for speaking your mind.
Never. It's never happened. And I push the envelope, and still I'm held in this envelope. It's never happened. But the attacks on showbiz people for joining political debate are vicious. And they're vicious because showbiz people joining political debates important. They have clout. They're listened to. So when Kate Blanchett talks about global warming, the attacks on her were, in a sense, necessarily vicious because she's an influential figure in the community. They're unfair. They're unfair, and the political purpose of the passionate attacks is to silence them. Jacki, they wanted you to shut up about politics, and apart from one or two intemperate remarks about the looks of a former Prime Minister, they seem to have succeeded. But that's what it's about. And so Barry Humphries has not for many, many years publicly talked about his dedication to the teachings and beliefs of Trotsky. He has been entirely silent on the fact that he is an enthusiastic Trotskyite.
Or Genghis Khan.
Or Genghis. No, you've let that slip once or twice. But your affection for Trotsky is you've been silent on that since the 30s.
I've tried to keep silence in the 30s.
So do you keep silent on politics? Because, I mean, it's said that you're actually politically conservative. Now, I haven't seen any particular evidence of that until now.
Why should you? My political views are private. And I think it's significant that most lovies, actors and actresses, as they used to be called,
yes,
actors, or theatre technicians, whatever they're called now, are always on the left, aren't they? They are always on the left. You don't hear very many of the people who favour the other side.
What about Mel Gibson?
There is Mel Gibson.
There is Mel Gibson. and touché, Miriam.
I don't suppose you'd identify yourself as being in his camp.
Mel Gibson. But, he's a fellow anti-Semite. You should sympathise with him. And Miriam, whose wonderful show of Dickens Women is in Sydney on Thursday night at the Opera House. You mustn't miss it. It is incredible. It may not be mentioned again, so I'm giving it a plug.
Barry,
you'll find North London Jews will be perfectly happy with what you have to say. There's a few anti-Semites amongst them, I can tell you.
And understandably so.
Barry, I'm just going to bring you back to your show because, as you say,
no.
Dame Edna is going on the road. Evidently, she's going to be ruminating, among other things, on climate change. So I'm just wondering...
Climate change, is she? Well, good, I've no idea what she's going to talk about.
According to the bumps.
Who told you this?
Well, I read a thing that your publicist put up.
Give it to me, because I need... I need to know what she's going to be discussing.
If she were, what would she say?
I do know she's cut her children out of her will. Her immense fortune she's keeping for herself. Even though she's been pumping a lot of money into the prostate lately. But
she has no thoughts.
Climate change.
She has no thoughts on the carbon tax, on climate change, on the great issues that seem to be...
She'll just make sure that the theatre is warm and comfortable.
John Hewson, you've obviously spoken out a few times in your career. Ever regretted it?
Only about birthday cakes, I guess.
Yeah.
No, look, I think Miriam's right. You've just got to say what you believe and be prepared to argue for it. Cost me an election, but it was worth doing. I firmly believe that.
What about President Obama, who's come out in favour of gay marriage?
Dragged into the open by his vice president.
Is that how it was?
Pretty much.
Well,
Right, so.
I wonder, will it cost him the election in America? And would it here, for example? No, I don't think it would here, because Australians are sensible. In England, where they're frightfully stupid, over 70% are against gay marriage in England. I, as it happens, since nobody's asked, I don't want to get married to my partner of 43 years. But some people do, and, you know, let them. It's another question, of course.
Who wants to marry her, then?
Well, I don't know of anybody. But if I find out...
Very good. OK. Let's just hope it's not Bob Hawke. Now... I'd hate to see the competition. The next question is a video. It's from Newton Gatoff in Bentleigh, East Victoria.
G'day, mate. In a country where women are the richest in business and most powerful in politics, has the Aussie machismo lost its mojo on the international stage?
Barry, that was a question right out of the 1970s.
And that man was really trying, wasn't he? Machismo.
You don't have any thoughts?
I was so interested in the performance, I didn't hear a word he said.
I think the essence of it was too many powerful women in Australia for Australian males to express themselves in the same way as they have in the past. What do you think about that?
Absolute bollocks.
Well, it's ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
It's a silly question.
Really silly.
And
Jackie, also...
It comes from a man who lives in a horrible suburb, by the way, Bentley. Bentley.
Sorry, my apologies to the people of Bentley. The views expressed by our panellists are not reflected in what the ABC believes about it.
The ABC has never heard of Bentley.
We certainly have, Barry. That's completely wrong. Do you have any sense of the Australian male on the world stage, Miriam?
Very little, I have to be honest. There's a cyclist, isn't there, whose mojo is powerful.
Cadell Evans, yes.
Yes, wonderful.
From Bentley.
Wonderful. He looks so good on a cycle as opposed to the other puny little gentleman that we referred to, Mr. Abbott, I believe is his name, who's also a cyclist of some repute.
He's not exactly puny if you were to see him up close.
Thank goodness I never have.
Mind you, Julia would be interesting on a bike.
Hear, hear.
Just get a mental picture of that.
OK, I mentioned Germaine Greer on this show not so long ago, and I don't really want to go any further into that territory. David...
You're not.
No, she had a bit of an issue with the Prime
Minister's... I know, but it was not nicely expressed, I didn't think. I thought I got it better.
You did. You're certainly more subtle, that's for sure. David, Australian men, have they changed a lot?
No, what is this rubbish? I mean, the international stage... I mean, this is the Australian male on the international stage, and it's embarrassing enough. Him and an Olympic cyclist, and that's all we've got. Poor Australia. And with Bob Carr as our foreign minister. Bob Carr on the foreign stage, and yes, and he's certainly fit, lean, and full of
Looks like he works for a funeral parlour.
What about...
OK, let's move on quickly. We have questions from the audience. People are too afraid to put their hands up. Some of them submitted questions earlier. This one's from Brett Morgas.
So I've got a really big bugbear, and that's there's increasing use of the term un-Australian when someone disagrees about something or disagrees about what's being done. And I think it's because there's generally an outdated view on a general scale of what it means to be Australian. I'm just interested in what the view of the panel is and whether we do need to spend some time to redefine who we are.
I'm going to start with someone who wants to become an Australian and just get a sense. Do you have a sense of what Australians are, Miriam, and do they need to redefine themselves, if you want to take the question?
I don't think you need to redefine yourselves. I think of Australians as being ironic, slightly cool in their attitudes, very fair-minded, humorous, generous, occasionally racist, extremely drunken most of the time. That could perhaps be modified a bit. I think it's a wonderful nation of strong, decent people. I'm not too happy that they don't have Dickens on the syllabus anymore. I think that's really quite shocking and should be changed, and I'm going to try to do that. But I love Australia, and my partner is Australian. She comes from a very strange town, an invented place called Canberra. And my first experience of Australia was a Canberran experience, which is not perhaps the healthiest to have. But I'm desperate to get in. Please have me.
Well,
You will.
it sounds like by acclamation you're probably in, but of course you still have to answer a questionnaire, as you probably know. And one of the questions is, what is Don Bradman's batting average? Do you actually know that yet?
I didn't actually know it, but Mr. Hewson very kindly let me into the secret, and I think it's something like 99.4, is that right?
Like that, yeah.
But it's
Well done,
okay because, in fact, that question is not on the questionnaire. It's all right. There are other tremendously difficult questions, but not that one.
Do they ask people about the characters in the novels of Patrick White? No.
Yes, they do.
David
they do.
is the author.
Yes. From Hurtle Duffield down. Yes.
Well, David is the author of a great biography of Patrick White.
Yes.
And I think today is a special day, isn't it, David?
It is 100 years today since little Paddy came struggling into the world in a Knightsbridge apartment with a view of Hyde Park and about 16 indoor servants. Yes, his struggle began a century ago today.
Typical Australian, by the sound of it.
He was, in fact, one of those Australians. He came from one of those families who believed themselves and felt as at home in England as they did in Australia. And I would just guess that you, Barry, are another of those who feel just as at home in Britain as you do here. And they lived in a big world which was absolutely Australian, but it had England too. And that was a very Australian experience. It wasn't just here, it was Australia, it was in fact in those days the Empire. And they felt themselves to be part of a very big world as Australians.
And now, of course, the Australian experience probably includes being part of Malaysia or Indonesia or Iraq or many other countries as well. So there has been a sort of great shift in our country.
Well, the gentleman who asked the question looks black to me. Are you?
Last time I looked, yes.
Well, are you Australian?
I came out here when I was 2 months old. So
you are now, aren't
pretty
you?
much, yes.
Well, isn't that fabulous? I think that's one of the strengths of the country. Because, you know, here I am white and here you are black. And you're in and I'm not.
We've got someone with their hand up. I just want to hear Barry on this question.
Well, I just thought you were badly lit.
I will come back to you on this. We've actually got... There's a lady over here with her hand up, and I'd like to take your spontaneous question, since you're the only one brave enough to do that.
Thank you. I responded to several of the questions that were happening, particularly Miriam's suggestion and lamenting that we don't have Dickens in our syllabus. But, in fact, we are Australians. We're not English. I think that's what our previous speaker was talking about. So that's, I think, one of the key things that's now... a key issue about our identity is how much of us are Englishness and how much is actually the diversity of all Australians, we are no longer English.
But Dickens is a universal writer. He's a great author.
Does that mean you shouldn't know about the best that there is? You should have Shakespeare. You should have everything here in Australia.
We should also have Patrick White. We should be celebrating our own cultural identity, not the identity of...
But it doesn't mean that you have to cut out the others that are there.
But look what Dickens did to this country. He treated Australia as a dumping ground for felons and for other criminals, it was an appalling treatment. I think Dickens should be struck off all school syllabuses because he did not have the kind of pan-patriotic view of the empire that was required at the time. It's just a terrible failure.
Beethoven and Mozart, we should have didgeridoos.
Barry, a serious question. The Australian identity. It was the question was to the heart of that question was about the Australian identity. Whether it's changing, whether we need to redefine ourselves. What do you think?
We've been anguishing about our identity for so long. It seems to me that Miriam's description of the Australian was an extremely good one and perceptive, and I think it's all we need. Do you go around all day long worrying about your identity, David?
No, I think it's a ridiculous waste of time. Let's just be. Let's
be. Let me go into the middle of this conversation and hear from Jacki. What are your thoughts about hearing that?
I have no idea what the Australian identity is. I think all the things that Miriam mentioned are pretty spot on, but we are such a polyglot lot. I mean, I'm half English and I love England, but I would never call myself...
You don't read Dickens, I hope.
I think we should have Christina Stead and Patrick White on the syllabus. I don't understand that.
They are on the syllabus.
Oh, I thought they weren't.
It's all right. Yes.
I read an article that they weren't.
We could have Dickens as well, I think that's the point.
Yes,
John Hewson.
yes.
Look, I think we're evolving. Our identity is evolving, and we should face the reality of the fact that it's evolving. I mean, I think our greatest asset in this country is that we've built a multicultural, multiracial society, a very tolerant, multicultural, multiracial society. It's a work in progress. I think we should build on it. We should recognise the value of the diversity and of experience and history and so on that comes from that. And I get frustrated when I think we try to fit a particular mould. I mean, some people want to go back to England because they imagine Paddington Bears still standing on every street corner. I mean, the world has changed. England's changed. We've changed. And we've got to recognise how we're changing and capitalise on that. And I'm very proud of what we've achieved as a nation.
Well, we're fast running out of time. There is time for one last question. It's from Maya Newell.
My question is for Barry. If Dame Edna was to grace us with her presence, perhaps a holiday from her retirement village, what would she think of satirists of the 21st century? And what is the value of humour and eccentricity in politics?
Well, I think when Dame Edna, as far as I can speak for this woman, looks at Miss Gillard, and rather wishes that she was there, she'd make a good Prime Minister, I think. And there is one moment in any evening which is catastrophic, and that is when you ask for the final question.
Yes.
It's always a disaster, like this has... What would Edna think of Australia now, do you say?
Yes, I think you could well pose that.
Was that it?
If that's the one you'd like to answer, Barry.
Well...
what would she think of Australia?
I think she would adore it,
yes.
As I do. I don't think I've ever really felt I've lived in a more blessed period in history or in a place. Everyone looks wonderful in this audience, which are sort of all teenagers, and reassures me that when I do this show, which I believe is soon, I can use a lot of old material. Because
believe me, Barry,
everyone who was at my other shows is dead.
Not all of us. Not all of us. In fact, it's probably a good idea because it doesn't seem that you really engage with politics here or want to.
No, I'm not interested really in politics, and I'm not interested in sport. So I miss out a lot. I used to be very interested in alcohol, so I can claim to be, you know, very, very Australian in spite of that.
David?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with him. You know, those were the years. Those were the years, but behind him now. And I think Edna's not left her run too late. The leadership situation in Canberra is astonishingly fluid at the moment, and there's likely to be a seat on the central coast of New South Wales up for grabs at any minute. I can see Edna powering into the seat of Dobell and transforming public life in this country.
And it's significant that this mythological city, this invented city of Canberra, is also the pornography centre of Australia.
Yes. The warehouses of Fishwick. It's where all Fishwick. What a name!
I knew I'd seen you somewhere before.
I thought we weren't going to mention that.
Loading your trolleys.
You in that rather heavy raincoat and those silly dark glasses. I saw through you.
I was going to throw around to the rest of the panel, but I've actually forgotten what the question was. So, sadly, that's all we have time for. Please thank our panel. David Marr, Jacki Weaver, Barry Humphries, Miriam Margolyes and John Hewson. Miriam, that's your cue to go down to the lectern. Next week, in what I can assure you will be a far more conventional program, Q&A will be live from Toowoomba in southeastern Queensland with the Minister for Regional Australia and the Arts, Simon Crean, Queensland Senator and Shadow Minister for Regional Development, Barnaby Joyce, the newly elected leader of the Greens, Christine Milne, and Torres Strait Islands musician, Jeremy Maru. Well, after an hour discussing identity, performance and satire, let's hear from one of the greatest writers and satirists of the English language. We'll finish tonight with Miriam Margolyes' performance as one of Charles Dickens' most memorable women, the heavy-drinking Sarah Gamp, specialised in midwifery and laying out the dead and recalling the passing of her own husband in Dickens, Martin Chuzzlewit. Until next week's Q&A, good night.
When Gamp was summoned to his long home, and I seen him a-lying in the hospital with a penny piece on each eye and his wooden leg under his left arm, I thought I should have fainted away, but I bore up. If it wasn't for the nerve a little sip of liquor gives me, I could never go through with what I sometimes has to do. As I said to my friend, Mrs. Harris, at the very last case as ever I acted in, Mrs. Harris, I says, don't name the charge, I beg, for if I could afford to lay out all my fellow creatures for nothing, I would gladly do so. Such is the love I bear them. Oh, thank you, sir. That's it, folks.